What if I told you that the unique you you've always believed in doesn't actually exist? Everything you think, feel, and believe about yourself, your personality, your desires, even your deepest struggles, may not be yours at all. How is this possible? And if it's true, then who or what is truly in control of your mind? Stick around to discover the uncomfortable truth that might just shatter the way you see yourself forever. The idea that your mind is a self-made masterpiece is one of the most persistent myths we cling to. We're told from every direction that deep inside there's a version of you that's untouched by the world, a core identity waiting to be discovered, unique and entirely yours. But let's look closer. What if the real you is not the product of some hidden, authentic essence, but the result of countless influences you never chose? Your beliefs, your preferences, and even the way you process emotions, how much of that is genuinely yours? Think back to your earliest memories. Picture a moment at the family dinner table. You're 5 years old, reaching for a second helping, and someone laughs. You always have such a big appetite. Maybe it's said with affection, maybe as a gentle tease. Later, at school, you're told to raise your hand before speaking, to color inside the lines, to line up quietly in the hallway. In that single day, you're given an identity and a set of rules, some spoken, some unspoken. You don't get to decide if you're the big eater or the quiet one. You're assigned these roles before you even understand what they mean. These moments aren't just background noise, they're the first lines of code written into your mind, setting the parameters for how you'll see yourself and the world. This everyday molding echoes philosopher Wilfrid Sellars' argument about the myth of the given. Sellars challenged the comforting idea that we have direct, unfiltered access to reality. According to him, the mind isn't a blank slate receiving pure data from the world. Instead, every perception, every feeling, every judgment passes through a framework built by language, culture, and social expectations. You don't see the world as it is. You see it as you've been trained to see it. Think about how this plays out. Society acts as the coder, and your mind becomes the program. The code isn't written in a single day. It's compiled over years, line by line, by people and institutions who may not even realize what they're doing. Family, school, media, they all contribute to the script. You learn what to want, what to fear, what to strive for. Even your supposed original thoughts are shaped by the categories and labels handed to you. The result? You move through life convinced that your opinions and desires are self-generated, when most are echoes of a collective script. Let's take a closer look at something as basic as the idea of success. You're told what it means from the moment you can understand words, grades, trophies, money, status. But who set these criteria? Did you ever sit down and decide for yourself what success should look like, or did you inherit that definition without question? The same goes for the concept of authenticity. We're urged to be ourselves, but even that idea has been commodified, shaped into a brand you're supposed to perform. You're encouraged to stand out, but only in ways that fit within the boundaries society has already drawn. Sellars' critique goes deeper. He argued that our entire sense of reality, the manifest image, as he called it, is a shared construction. We agree, often without realizing it, on what's real, what's valuable, and what's possible. Language, stories, and social norms become the architecture of our minds. Every time you describe yourself with a label, shy, ambitious, creative, you're reinforcing a reality that was built for you, not by you. The map you used to navigate life was drawn up long before you arrived, and it leaves little space for anything outside its borders. This isn't just an abstract philosophical point. It has real consequences. If your thoughts, desires, and fears are the result of inherited scripts, How much of your daily life is truly chosen? When you react with pride or shame, when you chase after goals, even when you rebel, are you breaking free or just following another line of code? The unsettling truth is that even our deepest struggles and triumphs are shaped by forces we rarely see. But recognizing this isn't a reason to give up. If you can spot the code, you can start to question it. You can look for the places where the program glitches, where your feelings don't line up with the story you've been handed. The first step toward any real freedom is to see the boundaries that have been drawn for you. Yet, there's a complication. The very tools you use to question and understand this, your words, your concepts, your language, are themselves part of the program. If society wrote the script, it also built the language you use to think about it. So the challenge becomes, how do you break out of a system when even your thoughts are shaped by its rules? Language is not just a tool you use to describe your thoughts. It's the structure that builds them. Wilfrid Sellers called this the manifest image, the everyday world you inhabit, shaped by the words, concepts, and categories you inherit from society. This image isn't a neutral reflection of reality. It's a shared construction, a framework that quietly decides what counts as real, important, or even possible. When you describe something as true, you're not naming a raw fact. You're making what Sellers would call an assertable claim, grounded in a set of inherited linguistic rules. Think about the labels you use every day: success, happiness, authenticity. Each word arrives with its own baggage, packed with stories, expectations, and judgments. When you call someone successful, you don't just mean they've achieved something. You're invoking a whole narrative about money, status, and admiration. But did you ever choose that definition? Or did you absorb it wordlessly from everyone around you? The power of language is that it feels natural, automatic, even invisible. You rarely notice how much it shapes your view of yourself and the world. This is the trap Sellers warns about. Words like failure or authenticity don't just describe, they prescribe. They set boundaries for what you should want, how you should act, and how you should judge yourself if you fall short. Ask someone what it means to be happy, and you'll usually hear a script: fulfillment, balance, maybe love or financial security. But why those things? Are they universal, or are they just the stories your culture has bundled into a single word? The reality is, you're not just using language. Language is using you. It sets the limits on what you can imagine and how you can interpret your own life. Take the idea of the manifest image further. It's not just a set of words, it's the entire lens through which you see the world. Without words like introvert or extrovert, would you even think to sort people into those categories? If the word failure didn't exist, would your setbacks carry the same sting? Language doesn't merely organize your experience, it enforces those categories, locking you into patterns of thought you rarely question. Picture a map. It feels like a helpful tool, giving you directions and making a vast world manageable. But a map is only as complete as what its creators have drawn. Anything outside its borders is invisible, not because it doesn't exist, but because you've never been shown how to look for it. Words are the same. They help you navigate reality, but they also create borders in your thinking, keeping you inside familiar territory and making anything outside those lines seem impossible or even unthinkable. This is the tension you live with. You rely on language to make sense of everything, but it constantly boxes you in, forcing you to see only what fits within its definitions. The trap isn't just in the words, it's in the narratives they smuggle in. Consider self-made. On the surface, it sounds empowering, but what does it actually imply? That all success must be individual, that collective support or systemic barriers don't matter. or that anyone who isn't self-made is somehow less worthy. These subtle implications often go unnoticed, but they shape how you judge others, how you treat yourself, and how you move through life. So, what can you do with this knowledge? If your thinking is shaped by a system so ingrained it influences your choices, emotions, and sense of self, how do you start to see past it? The first step is to question the words themselves. Don't accept inherited meanings without scrutiny. Look at the terms you use most often: success, failure, authenticity, even freedom. Ask yourself what they actually mean to you, and how much of that meaning you've simply absorbed from the world around you. There's no easy way out. Language will always play a role in shaping your thoughts. But by examining the labels and stories you've taken for granted, you can begin to loosen the grip of the manifest image. You can start to imagine a world that isn't limited by inherited definitions, a world where you have the freedom to create new meanings. But if words shape our thinking, how do we begin to dismantle a language-built cage? And if the framework of language can be this powerful, what about the forces that shape how you feel? The next question isn't just about thoughts. It's about emotions, and whether even your deepest feelings are as personal as you think. Every society hands you an invisible manual for feeling. This is the social choreography of emotions, a set of unwritten rules and expectations that shapes not just how you express your feelings, but how you experience them in the first place. Sellers would call this learning an emotional repertoire, a set of culturally defined scripts for how to feel. From the moment you're born, you start absorbing these scripts. You watch your parents, your teachers, your peers, and you learn which emotions are allowed to surface and which must be hidden away. You're taught, often without a word being spoken, that some feelings belong in the open while others are best kept behind closed doors. Consider crying. In some cultures, tears are a sign of strength, a way to show vulnerability, to connect, to signal that you're alive to your own pain and the struggles of others. But even here, the rules are precise. There's a right time and place to cry, and a wrong one. Step outside those boundaries and you risk being labeled unstable, childish, or weak. Society doesn't just shape when you cry. It decides what your tears mean. The choreography is so subtle, you often mistake it for instinct. This choreography extends to every emotion you have. As a child, you might have thrown yourself on the floor in a fit of rage. The adults around you didn't just ignore it, they trained you out of it. Over time, rage is translated into something more acceptable: stress, frustration, maybe a quiet grudge. Sellers describes labels like down mood or functional anxiety as ways society anesthetizes genuine feeling, dulling the edges until the original emotion almost disappears. You learn to repackage sadness as mild disappointment, terror as manageable worry, and pride as modesty. The wildness of your emotions is domesticated, tamed to fit the mold. This process isn't just about what you're allowed to show, it's about what you're discouraged from even feeling. Take love. You're handed a script. Love means romance, devotion, sacrifice. You're expected to feel it in certain ways, at certain times, for certain people. Step outside the script and you're told you're doing it wrong. The choreography doesn't just shape the performance, it shapes the feeling itself. You rarely question it because the steps feel natural, like you invented them yourself. But look closer and you'll see the cracks. Have you ever apologized for crying, even when you needed comfort? Have you felt ashamed for being too sensitive or been called cold for not reacting the way others expected? These moments reveal the invisible rules you've internalized. You carry guilt for breaking them, as if you've failed some secret test. The emotional language you use, words like too much, not enough, overreacting, All come preloaded with judgment. They don't just describe your feelings, they censor them. Society calls this process maturity. You're praised for your composure, your restraint, your ability to keep it together. But what's really happening is a kind of emotional anesthetic. You're taught to numb yourself, to feel only what's safe, what's expected. Even your breakdowns can feel scripted, like you're following a pattern you've seen 100 times before rather than responding to what's actually happening inside you. The result is a disconnect from your own emotional reality. This isn't just theory. Psychological research shows that emotional regulation is less about personal strength and more about following cultural scripts. You learn to smile when you want to scream, to swallow your grief, to laugh off your anger. The system rewards you for fitting in, for keeping the peace, for not making others uncomfortable. Over time, you lose touch with the rawness of your feelings, the part that's spontaneous, unpredictable, and real. Think of it as a dance you never agreed to join. The steps were set long before you arrived. There are moves for joy, for rage, for heartbreak. You learn them by watching, by mimicking, by surviving. And as you get older, the choreography gets tighter. The space for improvisation shrinks. The fear of stepping out of line grows. You might even start to believe that the dance is all there is, that your feelings are only real if they follow the script. But when your emotions feel choreographed, what does that say about the authenticity of your entire identity? Wearing the same mask day after day, you start to forget where the mask ends and you begin. That mask, the one that's supposed to make life easier by giving you a single, stable identity, tightens over time. At first, it's almost a relief. You know what to say, how to act, which parts of yourself to show. But as the years pass, the mask becomes less a choice and more a requirement, squeezing out anything that doesn't fit the image you're expected to present. This is the prison of consistency. Society rewards you for playing your part, showing up in the same way, being reliable, never letting your contradictions show. It starts early. School tells you that being dependable and predictable is the path to approval. There's little room for confusion or change. Doubts and mistakes are liabilities, not lessons. If you carry that lesson into adulthood, you'll find the same rules waiting for you at work. Institutions want you to be steady, easy to categorize, someone who doesn't make things complicated. Sellers warned about this pressure for personal coherence. He argued that the demand for a tidy, unified self isn't just limiting, it's a kind of mental confinement, a system built to keep you manageable and easy to control. Nowhere is this more obvious than on social media. Each post becomes another layer of the mask, another effort to match the brand you've built for yourself. You curate your image, picking the right photos, the right words, the right opinions. The goal is to be liked, to be followed, to be recognized as a clear, consistent figure. If you feel doubts or conflicting desires, you hide them. If you want to change your mind or show a different side, you hesitate. You start to measure your worth by how well you can erase the messy, contradictory parts of yourself. The mask isn't just for others, it becomes a way to keep yourself in line. The algorithms behind these platforms push you even further into this cage. They reward consistency, predictability, and simple categories. They want to know what you'll buy, how you'll vote, what you'll share. The more you fit a pattern, the easier it is for the system to sort, target, and control you. But real people can't be defined so neatly. You're not a single story, and you never have been. Inside, you hold 1,000 conflicting thoughts, feelings, and desires. Sometimes you want things that make no sense together. Sometimes you change your mind or feel two ways at once, or outgrow an old belief. That's not a failure, it's what it means to be alive. Yet the system tells you that any contradiction is a weakness. If you show too much complexity, you risk losing your place in the group or being seen as unreliable. So you keep the mask on, even when it suffocates you. The worst part is how easily you start to believe the mask is all you are. You internalize the rules, censor yourself before anyone else can, and start to forget the parts you've hidden away. Every time you suppress a doubt, a fear, or a new desire, you reinforce the walls of your own prison. The pressure to stay consistent becomes a habit, and eventually, a reflex. Sellers saw this as a fundamental problem. The system can't handle multiplicity. It wants you to pick a side, choose a label, stick to a script. It doesn't care about the parts of you that don't fit. And over time, you start to believe that those parts are mistakes, things you need to fix or hide. But that's not the truth. The contradictions, the doubts, the shifting desires, these are signs that there's more to you than the mask allows. They're not flaws. They're reminders that you're more than a product of your environment. Imagine, for a moment, what would happen if you let those cracks in the mask grow. If you stopped apologizing for your contradictions. If you allowed yourself to change, to explore, to admit that you're not always one thing. It's not a flaw to be inconsistent. It's a sign that you're alive, paying attention, and refusing to be boxed in. But how do you start letting the real you leak through those cracks? That's where the real rebellion begins. Real rebellion isn't about polishing the image you show the world. It's about questioning the very foundations you didn't choose. It means looking at the beliefs, desires, and emotions you call your own and asking, where did these come from? Most people are taught that self-discovery is a journey inward, a quest to uncover a hidden, authentic self. But what if that self is a patchwork of scripts, stitched together from expectations you inherited without ever agreeing to them? Freedom, in this light, isn't about perfecting the house of your identity. It's about tearing down the walls and seeing what remains when you stop mistaking the structure for yourself. Wilfrid Sellers's philosophy cuts straight to this point. He exposes how the things you take for granted, success, pride, love, even the way you process your own thoughts, are shaped by his concept of the manifest image, the collectively built version of reality. This image is so deeply woven into your everyday experience that it feels natural, almost invisible. But when you start to pull at the threads, you realize how much of your life is lived inside a framework you didn't build. The real rebellion begins when you refuse to accept that framework as unchangeable. Think about those quiet moments late at night when you're alone with your thoughts. Maybe you've chased goals that always felt just out of reach, or you've measured your worth by standards that never quite fit. Maybe you've wondered why certain ambitions feel so urgent, even when they leave you empty. That's when the cracks start to show. You realize you've been living out a script, one handed to you by family, culture, or the endless noise of society. Sellers would say this is the moment you see the machinery behind your desires. It's unsettling, but it's also the first honest step toward freedom. The work of breaking free isn't easy. It's not a single act of defiance, but a process, a kind of self-excavation. Imagine unpeeling layer after layer of a borrowed costume until there's nothing left to wear. Each time you question a belief or let go of a label, you risk feeling exposed. There's a vulnerability in admitting you don't have a ready-made answer for who you are. But that's where the possibility lies. Without a script, you're not forced to perform. You're finally able to respond to life in real time, not as a character, but as someone open to change. Sellers's critique of the manifest image is clear. Comfort comes at the cost of possibility. The familiar stories and categories offer security, but they also turn you into a predictable product. When you stop letting inherited frameworks dictate your thoughts and emotions, you create space for something new. This isn't the loud rebellion of breaking rules for show. It's the quiet insurrection of unlearning the choreography you've practiced since childhood, of listening to the parts of yourself that never fit the mold. Look at how you've learned to manage your emotions. Maybe you've been told that anger is dangerous or that anxiety is a weakness. You're taught to regulate, suppress, or repackage these feelings so they don't disrupt the story you're supposed to live. But what if those emotions aren't problems to fix, but signals, clues that something about your life doesn't line up with who you might become if you stopped following the script? Sellers pushes you to ask, who benefits from you keeping those feelings under control, and why have you accepted those labels without question? This process is messy and unpredictable. There's no promise of a new, fixed identity waiting at the end. Instead, what emerges is the freedom to create your life as you go, a life that isn't bound by the need to be one thing or to fit inside a story you never chose. You start to see that the self isn't a finished product, but a shifting, living process. Contradictions become possibilities, not errors. Doubt isn't a flaw, it's a sign you're paying attention. You won't find a new fixed identity. What emerges is the freedom to create in real time. But first, you have to face the void. That open space, where the old scripts no longer hold, is unsettling. Yet it's also the only place where real change can happen. And before you can step into that space, you need to confront the hardest question of all. What are you still holding on to? And what would it take to finally let it go? Start now.